higher education. Uh, we are seeing people from all over the place, all over the globe. So it'll be great to just have everyone introduce themselves, your name and where it is that you're dialing in from. And we really appreciate you joining us on a Wednesday evening on a nice, cloudy, rainy, windy Wednesday. So we are just going to give this a minute or so and let people join, and then we'll start the presentation and follow it up with the panel discussion. It'll be great to see where people are joining in from, and maybe even know what's the kind of weather there, because it's been pouring cats and dogs in Mumbai, and also quite rainy in other parts of India. Okay. So while that we have the introductions coming, I'll just get started. For those of us who are joining a session hosted by Systems Innovation for the first time, uh, we are a network of local communities for learning about and doing systems innovation. We are spread across the globe, and essentially, these are spaces for bringing people and organizations together for shared learning about systems thinking and innovation to solve complex problems. We do host events and different kinds of activities as well. Uh, like I said, we are globally situated. There are different city chapters spread across, about 14 to 15 of them. Uh, SI Mumbai is the first city chapter in India. Though we launched officially in March this year. And our first event was part of a co creation titled the same, Reimagining Higher Education in India. What we did in the first session was we had a participatory session using the Three Horizons model and looked at the higher education, the current system as it looks. We went on to then look at what the aspirational system could look like, what we want it to look like, and then some drivers for change which would lead or help that transition. And I'm just going to show you what that activity looked like. Yeah, this is again just so you know, we essentially conduct events on a regular basis to learn, connect, and create along with people to solve complex problems using a systems innovation approach. And now to show you what the session looked like, a glimpse of the last session that we had. It was very participative and engaging. People had questions, comments, anecdotes. And so, what that helped us do is we were able to assimilate all of that and gain some meaningful insights. Uh, so, some of the insights from the last session were that there is increased pressure in our current system with regards to higher education and the job market. There is a constant demand to improve education outcomes and even quality, if you may. There is pressure to improve the performance in educational institutions. It's not even at par across the board, and to make higher education universally accessible. That's been a constant challenge given the size of our country and the demographics. So then we, sat back together and said, how do we respond to this, given that we want to look at the whole system and engage from a systems perspective? We definitely need both transformation and scale. Uh, but we were also thinking if we need to rethink how higher education gets transacted. And our take is definitely yes. And to be able to do that, we thought one of the interesting ways would be to actually touch base with the sector experts that have been doing this day in and day out, and get them sharing some of these insights with them and getting them to speak about their experiences and seeing where we go with this. So I'm going to hand over to Tanuja next, who's going to set the context of looking at the higher education system from a systems perspective, and then we'll move right into the panel discussion. Thanks again for everyone who's joined us. Handing over to Tanuja now.
Yeah. Thank you, Maya. Can you let me know if you can hear me properly? I seem to have some internet issues.
Yes, we can hear you just fine.
Everything's good. Okay, then I will let you know when to change advanced pages. Is
Or
that
I
okay?
could stop share and you could quickly
No,
start
no,
it.
no, no.
Okay. Okay.
Please go ahead. Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
So as Maya said, Maya laid the background on higher education. What I will do is walk you through what's called systems science, only the very basics. And there are some new terms and new concepts, but I think they're very relevant and they are more intuitive than you think they might be. So, system science is the science of looking at the universe as a connected web, a network, wherein the participants can be seen to form patterns of behavior. And such patterns we can see not in just one field, like education or medicine or biology or ecology, but such patterns seem to transfer themselves across many fields, which opens up the possibility to learn from different fields and bring them in. Now, from the perspective of education and learning, both cognition and subjective experience are now part of the purview of science, which was not the case before. Certainly, as you know very well, we have been taught science as a purely objective thing, also a reductionist thing, which had no place for human emotions, human cognition, and human consciousness. Now, the participants of this kind of a system science, the players are called complex adaptive systems, where the term adaptive is critically important because the parts of the system learn as they go, which means that they respond to the system and they create the system as they go. Okay, next page, please. Then, yeah, thank you. So quickly here, learning itself can be seen as a complex adaptive system. I'd like to point out two developments or two lines of research that are currently very active. One is in neuroscience and the other is in the science of consciousness, where we now recognize that the brain is a structure, it's a physical structure, but mind is a process. So the formation of thoughts is a process within the brain structure, and it has a nonlinear aspect where we learn through phase transitions, which means we do not learn in little bits and little bits and little bits. We learn by connecting everything together and then forming a opinion, if you will, or forming a picture. And we call these aha moments. But this has a central and a large impact on what we think of learning and how it should be taught, and even on how we conduct tests in the future. And consciousness comes in as a emergent property of a complex brain. So it is very much now an integral part of how the brain functions, and therefore an integral part of how learning happens. Next page, please. Ah, So this is a more succinct visualization of the previous slide. I'll just move on to the next page. Here I'm visualizing the student as a part of the systems web, where the student has his or her properties, and the student functions within a wider web of large influences, everything from the educational institutions, the family life, his or her geopolitical location, the access to education is economic situation, et cetera, et cetera. So the education outcome is never a single factor outcome. I think most people know that intuitively, but by putting it in this way, we can then say that the outcome can be generated through bringing multiple factors together. And if you go to the next page, I try to show this a little better. We see here that the student, the teacher, and the teaching process are each complex adaptive systems within the larger complex adaptive system of the system itself. Now, each complex adaptive system is adapting to its environment, while the larger system within which it sits is also adapting to the environment. Now, while this seems very, very confusing, at the same time, each system has its own leverage points. So we now have a multiplicity of leverage points. So we can never say that there's nothing we can do, but it also means there's always an opening to take action. And there opens up the possibilities of achieving large goals through small steps at lower costs. Yeah. Next slide, please. Yeah. Now we come together here. We have amongst our panelists the previous page. We have a diverse set of panelists with a diverse set of experiences and working on the ground. And we ourselves in the SI network come from different backgrounds. What does it do? What does it do for us to come together in this way? We build a systems knowledge that brings transparency to all of the players. We give you a bird's eye view of the different players in the field. We then understand the different leverage points that each player may or may not have. We bring awareness to options that are now become visible once you see the entire system as a web. And by showing it in this way, not only do we unknot the knots, we make it less confusing, but by doing so, we make the possibilities of success higher. And so the messaging to clients, investors, partners can be a more positive one, while also creating the possibilities of reducing costs. Next slide, please. Yeah. As all of you have probably read in the media, that more and more industry leaders are saying how having a degree is not necessarily a proof of performance. So we bring together these panelists today. Thank you for being here. And we want to hear from their moments of leadership, their insights, and we want to show how they come together to form a much bigger picture. Let me hand over to Anshul now.
Thank you, Tanuja, and thank you, Maya, for setting up the stage. And first of all, I would like to thank everyone for coming together and joining us for today's session, today's panel discussion. I would like to start with this panel discussion by asking every panelist to introduce themselves. And I would like to start with Raji. Raji is a co-founder of an organization called Beyond 8 in India. So if Raji, can you share about yourself and how did you started the journey and what were your challenges from the education system that you have so far has been experienced?
Thank you so much for that intro, Anshul, and thank you, Tanuja, for setting the stage ever so well. And thank you, Maya, for setting this whole conversation. So good evening, everyone. This is Raji Naveen, originally from Chennai, India, but today dialing from Bangalore. Basically, in the last 15 years, my husband, Naveen Mahesh, and I have been constantly thinking about and being very intentional, organized, and deliberate about how can we expand the contours of just understanding what does it mean to be educated. And I think I resonate with you, Tanuja. Does educated mean just having a degree, or is it something else? Has been our journey in those last 15 years. And in that, in those experimentations, we have launched various incubations in our own school, right? So these incubations are focusing on social problem solving, public problem solving, social entrepreneurship, inclusion, sporting integrity, all of these where we have constantly looked at, okay, can education be a little more different? Can it have public problem solving? Children are just coming out of the system and not even, they don't even know how to really vote, or why they should vote, or who they should vote for. What does it really mean to be an 18-year-old? Our schools don't really prepare children for, right? So, and being social entrepreneurs, constantly we look around ourselves and we know that unless a learner, unless a person with privilege also takes others around them, we can never ever look at equity. We can never ever look at an ecosystem around us where the balances are sort of, somewhere there we see some balance, right? So be it social entrepreneurship and in inclusion itself. And in all of these, experiments, what we also did parallelly was build thought leadership. So in Head Start Learning Center in Chennai, which is Ashoka Changemaker School, it is one of India's first cohort of Ashoka Changemaker schools. We have a huge set of thought leaders who are actually leading all of these different incubations. And it was in this, very deliberate approach that suddenly in the last, I think, 2 years, we realized, like systems thinker Russell Ackoff would say, we were doing the wrong things rightly. We were trying to fix the curriculum. You just cannot fix it. You cannot fix, it's almost like asking for a Premier Padmini car to be converted into a Tesla, right? That cannot happen. So for that, you have to remove the steering, remove the gearbox, change the engine and throw it away and bring the Tesla in, right? So that's the problem that we were looking at, and we founded Beyond 8. It is our, sort of, it culminates our experiments and thoughts and research work in education. Beyond 8 is a complete alternative to schooling initiative for learners in grades 9 to 12. And what we do in Beyond 8 is we are creating, we basically provide transformative pathways for high school learners to pursue the best college liberal education in India and abroad. So what are the 3 core principles of Beyond 8? One is utagogy. Completely, all of you would have heard about pedagogy and andragogy, but I'm talking about utagogy, where it is basically listening to the learner's voice. Our alpha gen, they have their voices loud and clear. They are not going to be sitting around and just listening to the teacher talk and do things on the board. Absolutely not. We need to realize that they have a voice, and we will be better served if we are going to be listening to them, and if we are going to allow them to be directing and determining their own journeys. So looking at that utagogical perspective, we use the systems thinking approach in really imagining the box itself differently, right? So instead of thinking that 4,000 children can come inside the 4 walls of a stadium, maybe, I don't know, some how many ever acres of land, and then be boxed into different grades, which is a completely meaningless system, which we are continuing to work on just because it is the done thing. But we realize that that's not the way we have to do it. And pre-COVID itself, we designed a very modular and distributed system where children will learn in pods. The city will be a learning space. Online learning will be a part of the design. And we sort of, looked at all the things that are done wrongly in the existing system and sort of reimagine the whole design itself. And while we were doing, while we were utagogical in our thought process and using systems thinking, we realized that in the last 15 years, all that we have stood for, public problem solving, entrepreneurship, and all of these critical thinking, creative thinking, that seems to have a word, and that is liberal education, right? So I'll conclude my introduction here by saying that Beyond 8 is that culmination of a utagogical learning process where children have, inculcate liberal values in the liberal education system. And it is a very systems thinking based approach so that we will not rely on degrees. They will get that degree by writing the examinations that they need to write, but these are no longer valid, they are no longer relevant, they are no longer useful. Can we actually think about the future? And if we have to think about the future, we cannot think about it in the future. We have to think about it now. Thank you.
Thank you, Raji, for introducing yourself and telling about how your journey started. Next, we have Rahul with us. Rahul is a co-founder of Ed2Net Learning based in USA, and he's been working with the school education system in the K-12 school education system in USA. So, Rahul, I would like to request you to introduce yourself and tell us how your journey started and what were the challenges that you faced and what was your motivation.
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Anshul. And that was very powerful hearing about Raji's experience and her husband's journey. Yeah. And sure would love to visit your place sometime, when we are in Chennai next. In 2007, we started Ed2Net Learning in Dallas, Texas, USA, mainly to help the school system there to improve their performance. So it is an intervention and sort of a supplementary education for the kids there, K to 12, and helping them through the entire education system in the schools. And since then, we have been working with, over 10,000 students across various states in the US and trying to help them be at par, and we work with slightly disadvantaged communities more as a focus area. So like in India, in the US also, there is a distinct, disadvantages which, let's say, a Black community, Afro-African origin communities, poverty. So the same statistics hold good in the US. These communities, the children from these communities, by the time they reach high school, they are behind by 4 grades on an average. Okay. So their learning level drops down drastically, because of multiple reasons. One of them is definitely poverty and the focus on education and everything else. So that has been one of the major experiences there. Apart from Ed2Net Learning, my wife and I, we run free education for underprivileged children in India, and mainly 4 schools in Noida and 1 in Bihar. And we provide them, support, teach them till class 8, and beyond them, we get them admitted in other English medium schools, and then support them through the entire education life cycle. So we provide career guidance and mentorship till they are on their own and independent. Okay. I also have another third entity which is dealing with rural employment kind of thing, you can say, providing opportunities to self-help group of women and rural unemployed youth. Okay. Those who drop out from school education. This is mainly focused in the northeastern region of India, West Bengal, and northeast region of India, right? And in the introductions, I will just share my own educational journey. In India, since many people have logged in from all over. So in India, on September 5th, we celebrate Teachers' Day. People really talk about their teachers, this, that. I never connected with any teacher in my entire education life. So I am an engineer from IIT and an MBA from IIM, but, and supposedly I studied in the premier schools in India, right? Even in the K to 12 education, but I never connected. So one of the things these days I'm working on is ensuring that in the K to 12 education, the curriculum connects with each child. Okay. So it's a personalized kind of learning, and one of the focus area which currently I'm working in is to make maths. You know, in India it's called maths and mathematics, I'll say for everybody. You know, how it can be developed, the entire K to 12 curriculum using data points from the child's life. Okay. And we have really done from kindergarten to grade 5. So essentially, one of the bottlenecks in learning is Raji has mentioned about the school and the curriculum. I also feel about the textbooks, you know. So the textbooks in a way tells you that somebody else is more knowledgeable, and you have to learn from somebody else. It doesn't empower the child to know and learn himself or herself, you know, to look within and this thing. So one of the things these days I'm working on, how the child can create their own learning, you know, uh, using the data points around them. That is their experiences, how they live every day's life. You can teach the entire curriculum, you know, around a child's life. So you need not learn about some other case study somewhere else, you know, or a different story that suppose you are going there, here. So maths is a very abstract thing, you know, and many of us who are engineers, maths come very naturally and very easy, you know, to most of us. But statistically, worldwide, 50% of the people fear maths. Okay. And it is one of the reasons, one of the major reasons why school curriculum, you know, people drop out after 5th and 8th grades, you know, both in US and in India. You know, math is one of the major reasons for the fear of learning, right? So I'm working on those concepts as well. So the education system in the US, in India, and you know, I've been exposed to some other countries as well, uh, is helping me to understand what it means about the formal education sector, right? And so trying to build in that each child's journey is enjoyable, they connect, and of course they're self-aware and more this thing, and as well as acquire the skills which are required for overall journey, right? So that is in brief about me. And as we go along, we'll talk more about the education, right? So thank you, Anshul.
Thank you, Rahul, for that wonderful experience and sharing your personal journey. So, in the next panelist that we have is Shweta Raina. She is a founder of organization called Talrun, and where they work on creating a work-ready India. So, I would like to invite Shweta and welcome her to introduce herself and talk about her journey. Please, Shweta.
Thank you. Thanks, Anshul. So my journey actually began when I was working in the education system at a non-profit called Teach for India several years ago. I traveled to several colleges across the country, and I realized that there was a huge gap between what colleges were creating and what companies were looking for, what is now commonly known as the employability crisis. After that, I went to business school, and while I was at Harvard, I worked with a professor on digging deeper into this and understanding what is causing this gap and how can we actually solve it. What came out was a research project, and that today is now a social enterprise called Tallerang. Tallerang is a combination of two words, talent and boomerang. And what makes us different is we focus on an end-to-end solution to the employability crisis. So we start off at the assessment stage, right, to understand where does the candidate need to fit in terms of a career, then the training, and then ultimately actually securing the candidate an internship or a job. So we handle the end-to-end of the ecosystem, and we have an app and also a web app. So we try to leverage technology to make it scalable. But of course, there is a live component, and there is some amount of human element in actually upskilling a person. So we do have, a strong focus on mentorship as well. And in terms of, what we've seen over the years is the employers have an expectation that candidates should be perfect. That's the only way that they're going to take them on. And unfortunately, our graduates are not perfect. We have 35,000 colleges in India, and less than 3% of them, the graduates, which is almost 10 million a year, are employable. So it's just a fundamental mismatch in terms of expectation versus reality. And so what we tell our corporate partners is, the first thing you need to do is just accept that the person you're going to get is not going to be perfect. And I think once that happens and they have more of a mentorship mindset and a coaching mindset rather than expecting the candidate to be perfect from day one, becomes a lot easier for this employability crisis to get solved. So that's what we've seen over the years. And a lot of it is just managing expectations on the candidate side and the corporate side so that people eventually do get jobs.
Thank you, Shweta, for sharing your experience and your journey. Next, we have with us Rajesh Pillai, who is also CEO of an organization called Skillville. I would like to invite Rajesh and welcome him for the today's panel discussion. Rajesh, if you can please introduce and share your journey.
Thanks, Anshul. Good morning, good afternoon. I'm sure good evening in India for everybody who's around the world. So it's Skillville, by the way. So Skillville is primarily focused on building skill sets for the new age technology per se. We're looking at AI, ML, data science, IoT kind of programs. That's the area that we are really focused on right now. And of course, there's another aspect of our program, which is called the Lanka School of Business, which is BSB, where we are primarily focused on the management students. And I was just hearing what Shweta had to say in terms of mismatch of what corporates expect, the perfect student, perfect guy who will be joining them. I think, from my end of experience, there's been a lot of change on that aspect. Companies now don't really expect them to come full blown ready, but yes, I think now there is more of a change in what they're looking for graduates, especially if they're coming to a professional course. Is primarily their focus is not on is probably on skill sets and behavioral attitudes in terms of the higher education aspect of it. And once they are able to make that fit, they are still able to give them some leverage and time to fit into understanding the kind of role that they'll get into. So one of the key aspects for that that we've been able to fulfill for especially the corporate in India is we've been able to introduce our students to a 6 to 8 months internship, which is very long for a management school to do that. And we've taken that liberty. And the good thing is a lot of corporates have accepted that. They've been pleasantly surprised that somebody is able to do this, because that's something that a lot of corporates are more than happy to engage with students, because here they are looking at somebody who can probably look at doing certain amount of stuff, understanding what the company is doing, rather than doing a 2 month internship, where probably the student goes for 2 months, understands where this location is, where his cafeteria is, and by the time he's done 2 months of internship, he's back in college to write a black book and submit his so-called internship project. So there's been a change in that in terms of how that's been taken care of. At the same time, in the new age technology, I think a lot of students today, I'm sure people who are engineers will understand that the engineering degree today in India is a degree, and there has to be a major shift in terms of technology that is being taught today. And we've been able to bring that to students who are really interested in understanding what these are, because maybe a few years from now, maybe 2 or 3 years earlier, all these were jargons that were used: AI, ML, IoT. These are all big words, and they sounded very nice to hear, but nobody knew what was happening in that space. Today, thanks to companies like Skillville, and there are of course many more who are doing that and are able to bring that to students on the platform, where they will actually learn how to use these in real life cases, and that's the beauty of it. And we've been able to deliver that for students. And
nobody teaches us. So nobody teaches us how to mentor the student. So most of the teacher, like Rahul was saying that there was no connection between the teachers and students. So how I can connect with the student, how I can mentor, how I can tell them about the career counseling. So those skills we try to teach to the teachers. Plus, we also try to make a network amongst the teachers. So in India, teachers do not talk. In higher education, teachers do not talk to each other. Even the teacher in the same department won't talk. Maybe I'm taking a same paper with some other teacher, but we both are not going to talking to each other how it's going to that, how the practicals are going. And then there are a lot many things like the young teachers who are coming, they don't know where to talk, whom to talk about, how to teach. If they stuck with some problem, how to explain to the students. Like every teacher is not going to expert in every area of the subject. So there will be the some master of that, another I studied it at my graduation or post graduation level, but not the, so much of grasp so that I can teach it well. So there, how that networking can help, how the networking with a senior teacher or a teacher who is experienced on that topic can help those teachers, and how these networking can help in research. Like we talk about lot about research in India. Like India produces so much of research, but the problem is our research is not cited, though we are the third ranked number 3 in number of research paper produced globally. But when we talk about the citation of our work in research journal, we are way far behind. So how we can improve our research standards? So these networking, these collaborations, how we can do it, how we can utilize resources which are present in our institutes with each other, and how we can more give the students outcome based learnings. So that is what we are doing at our center, at National Resource Center, which is basically based in National Institute of Education, Planning and Administration, Delhi. Thank you, Anshul.
Thank you, Rohit, for introducing. With that, I would welcome every panelist and every participant. I could sense that we have when we talk about the education system, there are multiple angles to it. When Raji talked about the unconventional way of teaching, when teachers, and when as similarly as Rajesh. So there are a lot of this education system. We can talk. There are multiple components, and we are trying to bring those all components in today's discussion. And having said that, so when we talk about reimagining the higher education, we feel that every child or every learner just starts from the K. That's where the school they first interact with any formal component of any education system. And so I would like to start with you, Rahul, that you have been an experience in working in the K-12 education, especially in the US context. So it would be interesting to know that how K-12 education in US is different than India. And also as a student, we have personally felt, and it also came from our session, that students need to enable to develop their own opinions, their thinking, and then as Raji also mentioned, that they should be problem solvers. So what do you think that the things that we need to happen at the K-12 education level that can help a student in choosing their career path, as well as make the informed decision and prepare them for a better leaders and for the world?
Yeah, thank you, Anshul. So I would like not only to talk about US, India, and some data, some experience from the world, also what is happening, to build in a perspective about the education per se, what it means in the higher education when we talk, you know. So not only K to 12 education, but for development of human beings, the education really starts before schooling. And a lot of research shows that it is very important that the early childhood experiences and education shapes a child, which helps in the later on success. So if you look at a child at a later on adult, as an adult, we don't see what happened in the previous, 16, 17 years. So these foundations are very important to give a perspective that education not only elevates us to a higher social class, usually it looks as a means to earn more, but it also changes the way we think, we perceive the world around us, and then enables us to choose our actions or careers in this case. Okay. As the world is moving, only informed and empowered will be able to contribute productively in the global society. Rest will be marginal, right? And human capital, as we know, fosters economic growth. Enough data to show that if you spend more years of schooling, it leads to higher income. Okay. I'm giving first an example of Singapore because this visual thing is very bring point. So if you look at the data points, need not read the details, but the colors brown and orange denotes that there's no education or incomplete education dropouts. So in the 1950s, this is data on Singapore and the last poor nation to a developed. So you'll see the data that the uneducated people have lessened, and in the lower age category, now today, they don't have any uneducated person. Okay. So that is leading to more and more development. To bring about what I was briefed about, a different perspective between US and India in the K to 12, which is kindergarten to 12th grade, which is more of a US term, but now used globally. US has a very good public school system compared to India's, poor performing government schools, where even a poor person doesn't want to put their child if they have an alternative in a private school. Okay. The US generally spends more per child per year. They have a higher spend as a percentage of their GDP. The performance of the schools in India, 1 in 3 drop out of school system. So the school system is definitely a very poor performer. In the US also, it's not very healthy, 1 in 6 drop out. US is largely categorized small class size to 30 maximum, in India, in schools, it starts from 50, and it can go up to 80, 100 also in one classroom. So you can imagine how the teacher will be teaching the class of 100 people. In the US, you can have more flexibility in choosing your curriculum. The teachers in the US have to undergo certification, which is more state driven. So each state has different teacher certification qualifications and norms. In India, the general tendency is if you don't get to do anything else, you become a teacher because it's very easy to become a teacher. Okay. But in India, our focus is more on conforming to norms, rote learning. Okay. US gives a lot of emphasis on being self-aware, critical thinking, how to communicate. There is all-round development. So academics is just one spoke in the entire wheel of a child, while India is academic centric only, right? So the challenges from the Indian point of view are that we need to focus on the early childhood, which is before schooling, is definitely in a very poor state. Only now we have introduced in the new education policy, the poor health and nutrition of the children really affects here. Okay. We have a very high percentage of the children who are out of school or who drop out, even though the Right to Education Act was introduced in 2009 to ensure that each child goes to school. However, the children drop out from school still. And we know, all of us know that the school education, the quality is poor, and that's why you have a booming after school tutoring market, which is probably the biggest in the world. Yeah. mental education, through tutoring, through test preparation, and whole lot of job-oriented soft skills building courses, preparation for the job, preparation, how to prepare for an interview, those kind of things, which somehow doesn't happen in the school education system. There is another category of that India needs to take up the challenge, how to provide employment to the unemployed youth. So we have the National Skill Development Corporation, NSDC, Skill India, trying to do that. But however, there's a lack of entrepreneurship culture in India. Okay. For the adult uneducated women, especially women folks who are adults but uneducated, we have a few literacy and financial literacy programs. However, it's a wide area where, India needs to focus on. So broadly, these 5 categories I feel is very important for India to focus on. Some of the data I wanted to highlight that the gap is also widening between a high skilled and a low skilled population in India. And it has become equivalent of over 10 years of schooling between a high skilled person and low skilled. So a lot of inequalities and disparities is developing in India because of the way education is being imparted or provided to the entire population. Okay. So the future, this is one word which we have I've borrowed from Wolfgang Lutz. She does a lot of research on education. So Homo sapiens we are called, but it will slowly we should be called Homo sapiens literata. That means all of us have to be and learned. So the biological Homo sapiens, we need to acquire this. So for India, as I mentioned in the challenges and earlier stages, we need to look at early childhood health and nutrition, which will enable the child to ensure future success. A minimum of 10 to 12 years of schooling or education for all. Okay. We should focus on teachers training, and which I think Mr. Bhatia was also mentioning for higher education, but this is common from kindergarten up till. And for K to 12, we have very good stories of Finland, how it is like a most sought after job, and it's very tough. It's a 5-year course there, to become a teacher. While in India, if you just, even if you're a high school student, it's very easy to get into, kind of thing. K to 12 education should ideally unleash each student's potential. Our education should target that we should increase the education budget there. This year, it has been reduced. And obviously, none of the ministries worldwide education talks about, a zero dropout rate. On why students drop out from a education system, right? For the adult learning, we need to shift from occupational standards. Like NSDC was incorporated maybe 10 years back, and it still talks about occupational standards for each function. But those limit your outlook towards one particular kind of job skill. Okay, so if I want to become a waiter, I'll do this. If I want to become a plumber, I do this kind of thing. But in the modern outlook, we need to get into skill-based instead of occupational standards kind of certification. One proposition is to have an AI aggregator of training programs to get other. See, I am an engineer, technically a mechanical engineer from IT. But still I can call myself a mechanical engineer and get by with it, So there needs to be certification, upgradation, and of that if I be called an engineer, okay? These needs to be encouraged so that we become lifelong learners, We also, the government should try to get to funds and grants for lifelong learning and involving the foundational skills. So what are the foundational skills for future? I'll just highlight here, you know, uh, actually, yeah.
This is Tanuja. And unfortunately, I have the most unwelcome job.
Yeah, so this is a light slide. I am just keeping the foundation skills which will require to thrive in the future of work. So we talk about in the jobs and seeing that, oh, this is so talented. This fellow is so talented. But what is that talent? So this is taken from McKinsey's research, you know. So they call it deltas, distinct elements of talent. Okay. So these are 56 deltas which are across skill groups, and there are 4 categories, you know. So cognitive skills, self-leadership, you know, and digital, and these categories which are, I think you can see them, interpersonal, and under that there are various categories which we can take on in future discussions, because this needs to be incorporated in the regular curriculum of K to 12 as well as college to be part of this. And currently it is being supplemented by independent players who provide one or more of these aspects of training. Okay. So I'll end my this thing here. Thank you.
Thank you, Rahul. There were certainly great insights, and I mean, we can clearly say that, and it came from our last session as well, that in India, mostly education is mostly, any stakeholder point, whether it's a parent or whether it's a, teacher or a society. The mental model is around the academic focus, or they see education as a means to climbing up the economic ladder and well-being. And we also feel that there should be a concept of lifelong learning, and the foundational skills, and the education should provide the opportunity and a space for a learner to unleashing that potential. That's who is working in the similar line. So Raji, my question is to you. When lifelong learning, foundational skills and all, and these are considered to be an unconventional pathways, and those alternative approach which are not yet in our education system. And in our education system, parents is one stakeholder who decide everything for their student, right? And when you're on since many years for this, providing this alternate approach for the approaches which can replace the mainstream education. So how do you see attempt challenges that you to parents for adapting this kind of and encouraging their children to take up these kind of courses?
A very valid question. Thanks for that. First of all, I'll just talk about 2 things. Mukesh, the message that you have put in the chat box, it sort of, reminded me again another very nice quote by Russell Ackoff, systems thinker, where he says that instead of solving a problem, we need solution. We have to think about dissolving the problem, right? That's the way your problem is actually going to go away. And I think we all know that 7 billion people in this world, 7 billion paths to purposeful living, right? First, so when we look at parents, first of all, we can't think as entrepreneurs, as people who are reimagining. We have to first of all acknowledge that parents actually come from a well-meaning place of security for their children, right? They want, you asked about Anshul, how they actually want to climb up the economic ladder and all. Parents actually want children to climb this so because they want children to actually adhere to a family or their ethnic community. There are so many aspects in that ways. And those 2, the first one is compassionate empathy, something that you would not have thought. You may have thought I'm going to use some big jargon or something, but compassionate empathy is all about, first of all, just connecting with the parents' fears. right? And when do the parents actually meet you? Conversation, right? The first time that when you meet the parent, at that time, if you're actually going to learn and look at their fears that they have and sort of assuage them through a very deep conversation, meaningful process, and use that enrollment process not to, we don't have any, we don't as admission or admission test. None of that exists in Beyond 8. Conversation, the conversation, the parent is actually given a report on what actually they voiced out as their fears, their aspirations, and all of that. Suddenly, that empathy is created with them, feel sort of, assured that, okay, fine, these people actually hear me. They are listening to my child. They are, they are actually designing something that is going to be specific to the needs of my child. So that's the first step. And the second step is we have something called as a dream mapping process. Why we say that we are utagogical in our approach and our approach is very learner determined, the dream mapping process is a very intense 3-hour conversation with the learner's family, which is like the first step for the learner. Actually, no teenager's parent would have heard their child for 3 hours fully, okay? Today's teenagers, everything is like a monosyllable, one word, maybe not even that, just a nod will, you will know what they're saying. And in this, children just open out the floodgates literally, because the questions are all, so connected with them, and sort of into their aspirations, their strengths, and that sort of becomes the first step in designing their learning journey. And that kind of empathy, when you build with that family, they are going to go tell 10 other people. And that's what you need when you're trying to reimagine, when you're trying to introduce a new idea. Oh my God, I have worked for 15 years and I know all of these systems are not working. Let us rubbish all of that and let us bring this new thing. And you know what, world, this is the best thing that you should have. I don't think we can adopt that approach. It can only be done through that, the compassionate empathy that we generate with the parents and the learners. Now, just being nice is not going to help, right? So the second aspect in how do we convince parents and help them understand is by very thoughtful and deliberate processes. Do what, say what you do, happening, right? That's the best proof of the whole concept is just show it to them in that, not brick and mortar as in school and buildings and classrooms and air conditioners and all of that, but truly what are we going to measure in our children's processes, that they will have a light in their eyes, right? When they are learning, that's what happens when you're seeking a learning journey. And when parents actually see that, they realize it, right? So when I say we are very thoughtful and deliberate, first of all, Beyond 8 was actually what I did was, as a part of my education at Harvard in the Certificate of Advanced Leadership course, used Beyond 8 to actually use the program to develop, design, and get peer reviews and guidance. So there is a scientific component of it, which is before even going to the parents and students, there is a lot of design and peer reviews that you get from the experts in the field, right? So sort of, you understand these are the things you need to look at, you need to measure impact, and all of those aspects come in. The second aspect is about, when we say liberal education, when we say we provide transformative pathways for liberal education, we can't just say, okay, we build critical thinking. So what do you do? What does a teacher do to build critical thinking? Oh, I'm not sure. You can't have those answers, right? So we actually use the value rubrics that have been created by the American Association for Colleges and Universities. It is a consolidation of all the best practices, and the rubrics have culminated from everything that works in the world into a very beautiful rubric system. And we actually use those rubrics to actually design, measure, communicate with the learners, and help learners understand that when I say critical thinking in physics in this assignment, this is what I mean. So when you make the process transparent, so if you ask me, Rahul, are there, do you face any problems? Actually, I would say that if we do things differently, parents will have a problem. Our parents will say, oh my God, this is not what Beyond Age should do. Don't do those things. This is what Beyond Age should be doing. So I think if we look at the problem in the right, we will be able to garner support.
Thank you, Raji. I mean, I got some of the quotes from your today's discussion, and I'm gonna sure use those quotes. I love the word you use, the empathy, compassionate empathy, and to help. Also, when we say that parents are coming from their some mindset and all those empathic, these are coming from their own experience as well. I mean, because they lived in this world where you have the whole social, economical, and political context, and they have been into those, where they values all those things, and that's why they feel secure they want this kind of security for their children as well. So, but when there is another angle also, they are being influenced by these environmental, the political environment, and certain roles to play when it comes to learner education. It's not just the parent. So one of those influential actor in this whole ecosystem is the employer. Those employer side is being influenced by the kind of skills that you see, the kind of job market is being produced, also being influenced by all those kind of job markets. So my next question is to Shweta. Shweta, we see a lot of rapidly changing, that our environment is rapidly changing. There has been a new kind of skills, and then Raji is talking about certain sort of skills, and Rahul also talk about lifelong skills, softer aspect, but the employer also seek for some technical and non those hard skill as well. And our current, and if we look at the current curriculum, which is very outdated. So my question is to you: what are some things that need to happen at the those employer side at the university level that can make learner more adaptable and future ready by incorporating these both softer skills as well as these hard skills? And how do we reimagine the role of these two players?
Got it. Thanks so much, Anshul. And I've definitely learned a lot. I've been taking a lot of notes in this session. It's been very, very helpful for me. So I'm not going to, say that I have all the answers, but I can tell you the approach that we're using. One is we really believe that you need both the soft skills and the hard skills. So the slide that Rahul showed, being a McKinsey alum, I can tell you that it definitely appealed to me. It was very clear and crisp, the last slide that he was on. However, I didn't find it easy. So that's something I need to check with McKinsey on, because I did see that there was a lot of overlap between, the self-leadership and the collaboration, etc. So we have 26 21st century skills that are actually exclusive and collectively exhaustive that we focus on. And the idea is that whether when you have this skill set, you are actually work ready and you can compete. So for example, being able to write effectively is a different skill from being able to speak effectively. These are two very different skills, but usually in colleges, they just say, actually break down and unbundle the skill sets that you need. And they need to be very, very specific. So what we do is we believe that these 26 21st century skills need to be taught in a specific manner with projects and training and internship exposure, so that you can actually develop, compete in the area that is required. Now, in not all jobs you need all 26. So for example, there are skills such as coding. Not all companies require you to code, but you might need at least an introduction to coding. You should at least know what it is. We have interns who go and work in fashion and they tell their managers that, okay, I can't do Excel, and they get fired because the manager is like, hey, you might be working in a fashion magazine, but you still need to do sales and you still need to know basic Excel. So this combination of skills together is what's going to make a future ready graduate. It's no longer about I'm a lawyer, I'm a banker. It's about a variety of skills, a basket of skills to actually compete. So that's where the first thinking has changed. And we see that from employers, whether they're hiring coders or marketers, they require a plethora of skills. Now, the second thing is, exposure. So a lot of students are sitting COVID in their homes. Of course, they have the internet, but they're not able to actually get access to projects and internships and mentorship. They need exposure, because when they talk about, say, finance, it's not actually finance. They're talking about maybe accounting, but they're not talking about financial modeling, which is what the investment bank is going to ask them in the interview. So exposure is majorly lacking, and without exposure, it's going to be very difficult. Colleges need to make sure that they are providing their students with exposure to their alumni, or to internships, or to projects, and some sort of real world skills. And then I think the third thing in terms of what colleges need to do, what institutions need to do, is they need to stop thinking about it from when they were in college. So all of us have the habit of saying, when I'm like, oh, when I interned, this is what happened. It's not about it's about the current student and their future. And so exactly. I think a lot of it is about unlearning. So the faculty do come in with a lot of experience. I'm just saying that the world has changed drastically since, all of us. So we need to really unlearn everything we learned in college and what we did in our jobs, and what we were told is, mathematics and science and French and whatever, and focus on what is the future of jobs and move forward and really look at what do companies want. So a lot of times, colleges are like, oh, I have the best graduates. And I'm like, what? They might be great on paper, but they're not going to get the kind of jobs that they want, unfortunately, because you haven't really prepared them with the skills that companies are looking for. So I think, a lot of us are very proud of our institutions. Like, I feel that way about my alumni, they are amazing. But then when company tells me that this candidate isn't up to the mark, I get a rude shock, and I'm like, okay, I need to go back and revisit my thinking on what am I actually doing to prepare these people, and how is it that I can do better. So we need to have that humility to really, I think, reflect and improve our own curriculum constantly, and that's the only way that we can and be ready. And I think on the corporate side, like I said earlier, we need to allay the perfectionist mindset. We need to be more flexible. So a lot of companies come in and say that we want someone who is available for 3 months and 10 days only. If he's available for 2 days less than that, we will not, ability. They want empathy, they want mentorship, they want kindness in the workplace. So companies also need to adapt according to Gen Z and make them have a good experience as well. So I think that has also changed, and our internships and jobs, we really suffered, but that Gen Z doesn't really want to suffer. They want to enjoy. So
thumbs up if you can hear me. Okay, thank you. So thanks, Shweta, for the part. And there are lots of unlearning that we have to do at different levels. I mean, at a level and at a teachers level and a faculty level. Even I think that there should be a lot of unlearning that need to happen at our side as well, because they also have a lot of expectations grounded into the education system. And when we talk about there is a role that teachers creating learner situation in India high. The teachers are very aware that you can't have that personalized learning environment for each of every student, and every teacher can't cater to the need of each student. And then comes the angle of this unlearning. Then we see that there are lots of human resources gap at front of the institution and university level. So my working with the teachers capacity building. So Rohit, given all these things that we need to have unlearning, we need to prepare India with the new skills along with the lifelong learning and all those things, how we can increase the teachers capacity and ensure that they are equipped with the latest skills and are able to cater to changing environment and changing students and employers.
Thank you, Anshul. So I just give you an idea, like I'm going to talk only about the higher education. So I have no exposure at a K-12 level. Uh, Latest survey shows that India has 1043, like 1043 universities, colleges, and about 11 standalone institutes. We have roughly about 38 million students, 15 lakh teachers, and out of these colleges, 42,000 colleges, 60% colleges are in rural India. We were talking, all of you were, like Shweta was talking about skilling, internship, mentorship. How many of us can reach there? No. How many rural students can have opportunity to internship in Goldman Sachs, PwC, anywhere? Like, let's not talk about a top corporate, just talk about a MN, small company, small consulting. No, they have no chance. Why? They are also not exposed. If I am exposed to these opportunities, then only I can train my students. Shweta will be going to charge some money, but every rural student cannot afford that money. But again, as a teacher, if I upskill a teacher in mentoring them with connecting them to these teachers who are in the major cities, who are at a good institute, who connect or mentor five teachers, like one teacher at a central university mentors five teachers in a rural colleges, explain to them what are the different opportunities they can introduce to the students, how the basic skills can be introduced to the students, like soft skill. Like nobody cares about a soft skill in a rural, or even the teachers at a rural college do not know what is soft skill, what is empathy. We were talking in this conversation very lightly, empathy, connecting to the parents, but no parent comes for admission of their students in a rural college. Nobody comes, nobody bothers. They are busy in their activity and daily earning. They won't come to that. So how are I going to connect that? As a teacher, it's going to be like if we train them. Now the problem comes, most of the teacher comes for higher educations, which has been started recently by Government of India. Like now there are scheme like Pandit Madan Mohan Malviya National Mission for teachers and teachers training. So this is one scheme that government has launched to upskills the teacher. Now they made compulsory 1 month induction programs for teachers. A lot many of taught skills, how to talk, like the senior people we know, we don't connect it very well to our teachers in colleges. Like even myself, I'm not graduated too far back, but I remember in my college, I have a fear of talking. Nowadays, when I used to, student can so that modules to these teachers and how we are that getting that certificate, 1 month certificate is compulsory now, but whether that teacher is using that in the field or not, that is the what we need to look more about in the ministry perspective. Then we talk about technology. So again, we did a survey last year when this pandemic started and suddenly we shifted to the online teaching. 60% of teachers are not comfortable with computers. They don't know how to make PPT. They don't know how to use Zoom that time. Now, basically, number would have been shifted, but it's the survey that we have conducted in July 2020, our center. Now, 67% of the institutes, rural institutes or tier 2 institute doesn't have a Wi-Fi. Teacher doesn't have a Wi-Fi. Then there is a problem how you are going to connect. If you don't have a Wi-Fi, reliable Wi-Fi, I cannot go about. Like of them are using data pack, and that 2 GB data pack they have to share with the children's for online classes. Now another things come mentorship. How we are going to mentor? I told you, UGC now proposed to start national mentorship mission. So that is the guideline is on the UGC website. So anybody interested, they can look. That is now they are making it mentorship, like the senior teachers who are retired or the senior teachers who have a time, they are going to mentor the new teachers. So this is how we are going to build on the capacities. Another thing, the capacity is networking. Like if as a teacher, I made a good practice, like I made a good practice of teaching something, or having a internships, small internships, or like citizen science data internships. As a science, coming from a science background, I can use a small citizen science projects to introduce students to the topics of how to collect data, how to interpret data, how to write a report. This is least I can do. Like I don't need a big amount of money. Like simple the project that can be done, collecting a pollution data and thinking, or like how the diet patterns change in the COVID. So that kind of small projects, if I develop, I can, if there is a network, national network of teachers, and if we put it that whole network and it's percolated down to the network, and it is being shared to these teachers and students, and they get trained. So this is how the capacity is going to be developed. But when we talk about these, we have to keep in mind how we are going to get more inclusive of rural colleges, state universities.
Yeah.
So that is what we are working now.
Thank you, Rohit, for that perspective. And that's very interesting that you brought the point of how do we bridge the gap between the rural population and rural areas with the cities, because if we look at the current system, there are many tier 2 and tier 3 cities in which the college and the learners don't have proper knowledge about what kind of suitable course are there, or what are the changes that are happening around the world and all. So my next question relating to that is to what is the approach that we should take, or what are the things that we need to do to make this system, you are coming from a tier 2 city or whether you are coming from a tier 1 city, and how do we bring all these stakeholders together to make this whole education system equitable?
Thank you, Anshul. Let me just before answering the question, I'm very happy with the thought processes that have been coming through, especially what Shweta had to say and Raji had to say. These are very if I were to use they're on the right track of what needs to be done. Okay, in terms of the way the education system in India needs to change, and while we may all talk about we can add 20 more problems to the ones we're discussing already. Believe me, there is those topics, and Indians, that's the first thing we want to do. Let's talk about the problem. Okay, we can think about the solutions. Just to address that aspect, and what Raji said really resonates with me when she just go back to, I think somebody even wrote that there in the chat, which was I don't know, what was that small little thing that she said about sorry, I think I
problem dissolution, is it?
Exactly, absolutely. That's the word, and that's the way it is. I mean, just to give you an example today, I mean, we're all talking about standard job opportunities in higher education. I mean, if I were to go back just 2 years from now, I have never heard of, I mean, now we've all heard influencers, bloggers, YouTubers, okay, I don't know, social entrepreneurs, and these are people who are making money out of this. And let me tell you, just if you go and search YouTube today, with all these problems that we're talking about, disconnectivity, connectivity, and all that, if you go and search for local language classes, you'll find the number of people who are excellent, may not have the reach that the influential people in the cities have. Is amazing. Okay, I think the idea is to get those people a platform where they can create that kind of a need. Okay, one of the things which is very unique to India, and I'm sure we all will agree, is the languages that we have. Okay, we all are speaking English. The other one would be Hindi. Just can you imagine somebody? How many of you can go and say I can speak Tamil and teach somebody in Tamil and Malayalam? That's it. Sambar, they'll start making sambar out of it. That's it. No, it's a different ballgame. But Kerala is supposedly the highest literate state in India, and they probably have a lot of technology which is being used, and most of the students are probably learning in English, but they think Malayalam is what I would say. Just for use of any other terminology right now. Okay, But the fundamental thing is the focus has to be on ensuring we are able to bring these learnings to people in a language that they understand.
Yeah.
That's one aspect of it, very, very important for us, because unlike the Western world, where even if it's Spain, Germany, where they speak one language,
Yeah.
here we have a minimum of 15 different languages. Okay, and that's a key area where we can make the difference. If we are able to teach the same mathematics that we all are worried about, and we can't, and which is a fact. A lot of people don't understand mathematics the way we would want to have. Yes, we have the IITians and the IIMs where they probably are been smashed in from day one. That's when you will go to IIT. Doesn't have to be. I don't teach my third standard son mathematics that way at all. I just say, you do your counting the way you want to understand. You understand mathematics the way you enjoy, and if that can be brought about, that's the way to solve these problems. We don't really have to create new systems, but we probably go back to exposure. I think exposure to industries, which I think even Shweta was mentioning earlier, is very limited to second and third tier cities, right? We need to ensure that can be brought in. Okay, and COVID is a great leveler, is what I would say today. Today there are students. It is. Believe me. It's like the old saying, necessity is the mother of invention. Believe me. Today, if we are using internet as a platform, and we're all talking right now, we probably would have been otherwise sitting in a convention hall. We'd all been invited, sipping tea and exchanging cards. That's not happening. And believe me, it's not going to happen for a long time now, right? But look at the kids; they've adapted so fast, and we need to give them that space. We don't have to hammer it to them. Say that do this. This is the way to do it. No, if the student is learning on his application, that's the way it is. But you're right. How does it reach to the last mile, as we call it, to the second, third year? We will have to let private players come in. We don't expect the government to do all of this. And India is not US. Let's be very clear. Even if India wants to, even if the government of India wants to do it, it's not going to happen. It just will not. It is not the government's ability to do it. I mean, just imagine, to vaccinate 100,000, 100 crore people is going to take them 6 months. So just imagine educating and getting this to so many students, and that also over a period of time. So don't leave it to them.
Yeah.
I think it's people like us, and there is a lot, 5 of us, and I know for a fact that at least 1,000 or other people who are bringing this, and there's the generation in its approach to ensure it reaches to those places, and decade, if not earlier, there will be a larger transformation in the education field because of the private players coming in. And I say private, I'm not saying they're there to make money, but people who really have the interest of those students and those people in those rural areas that we want to, as the terminology we use, and that will happen. And believe me, they are more aware today thanks to the social media. And even if it's 2 GB, they will find time to get that out. And if you see all those images where students are actually climbing on trees and learning, and that's what we need to focus on. There is somebody who's ready to do that. Okay, and the idea is, can we bring that technology to them at a cheaper and much faster rate? And I think with the advent of all the technology that is coming in, we will be able to do that. And I think the future is brighter than what we expect, but it will. That's the beauty of India. We will flow. We will probably not jump, but we will reach there as a mass, and that's the beauty of it, I think. And we will surely be there.
Thank you, Rajesh, for that wonderful insight. I mean, you mentioned 3 points. One is how we can leverage the regional language. Second is how the privatization can help. And third is the role of technology. And we feel that technology can play a massive role to, cater to a wider audience, to deliver the education, the kind of education that we want.
Actually, one small thing, I also want to bring out, there are some really big corporates who are getting into this, which is, just to mention, I'm sure most of you would know, IBM, India to get students across the region, okay, it's going to be immense. I mean, don't underestimate, we all talk about Amazon doing things here and there. No, they're doing a lot of stuff in education, and it will come to the focus when it comes. And they have the length and breadth to do it. Okay?
Yeah.
And that's going to be amazing in the coming years. It's just how fast do they do it. They're just building that base for themselves, and the kind of stuff that they will do, which the entire country's policymakers will not be able to do it. All these issues that they have to be addressed by these people will have been doing that from a very ground level. IBM is one of the big case studies in India, which you will see. They're going right from, especially in the higher education, in the technology, they're allowing students to learn technology, and that's the big differentiator that's going to happen.
And I mean, there are lots of comments that are flooding, in the chat box onto your comments, Rajesh. And since we are running short of time, I feel that there are a lot to discuss when we want to discuss about the education system, especially from a solution point of view. Every one of you mentioned certain solution, and you are already implementing them. That's a very wonderful thing. And I like when Rajesh said that the future is brighter than we expect, and we are very hopeful that it is surely the brighter future. So since we are running out of time, we are just want to take some questions from our audience, and we have from Eduardo that what is the level of awareness and understanding of those in charge of design of educational system in India? So I think here he is referring to all the stakeholders like policymakers and alliances and all regarding a holistic view of education. If there is an appreciable gap, how do you suggest to change and make the existing model obsolete? So I think in a simple term, if I say that we are talking about the current system is not working very good, and then how do we influence current people who are designing that obsolete system to switch to that newer system? If any of you can please highlight.
I may take that.
Yeah.
So Anshul, I think after a very long time, I think I don't know how it happened, but the government has a new, and thankfully, okay, they've taken the bold step of really trying to cut the bureaucracy out. So they're trying very hard, and I think they have taken the very first step. Okay, they have, in the next couple of years, you will see, especially in the higher education, that all the so-called pillars called AICT and NAC and all will have a very, very small role to play. Okay, they are not going to dictate terms to universities and colleges. Okay, but the next important step is that the so-called colleges that we have, the thousands and that we have, they need to step up and say, okay, now I am ready to make that change in my curriculum. Okay, and that's the big step. Okay, and that's going to happen. So so you will see a lot of colleges, especially in the cities. Yes, you will see that, but the other in the second tier 2 cities and other words, that's where the government will probably have to do the push and ensure there is more inclusive, there is more collaborative programs. When I say collaborative, I'm not saying an engineer really doesn't have to do only engineering, right? Why doesn't he learn something about finance in his 4 years of engineering? Okay, why does an art student has to only learn about art? Why doesn't he understand finance? Tomorrow if he has to go and even sell his painting, just a wild imagination, how does he set up a business? You understand? That is what it needs to be done. Okay, and and there are people in this platform, I'm sure, who would have 10 ideas right now. What that can be. So does a 10-year-old today think about doing a job? Believe me, they don't. Today's 10-year is not interested in doing a job. He thinks he's going to do something very fancy. He doesn't believe that his parents are working, especially in the last 2 years. So for them, the concept of work is, my parent is at home. He does some talking business, and there's some money which comes home. Okay, but he knows that there is something else that I can do, and I know money is secondary now. It's more of what they are actually good at and what they will be able to do. So I think the big thing is the government has taken that initiative. It's more, as I said, for us to take that forward and make those changes. So there are a lot of, you will see a lot of, so just to give you an example, there's a university called Flame University in Pune. Okay, check them out. They are doing very innovative programs. Okay, arts and and things like that. There's another one I forgot.
Liberal arts.
Yeah. Liberal arts, yeah. And there's another college called Eduversity or something. Absolutely.
Yeah,
brilliant.
I can just add one thing here on how to influence people. So, you have to show them best practices, you have to show them results. So we've worked with a lot of government projects, a lot of government colleges, we've done a lot of faculty, train the trainer, all of that. You have to ultimately get people placed. And when you get people results, then you can get their respect and move forward. The second thing is there's freemium, which is the new term, right? You give something for free and then people can, so our app is freemium. So we provide free training and content and mentorship to the whole country, whoever wants to take it. Now it's up to them to actually log in, and they need a smartphone. Not everyone has that. But yes, you have to provide some amounts of freebies in this country because, like was earlier, everyone can afford the training. However, there are government schemes and CSR, NSDC, etc., which private players can tie up with, and they can subsidize their programs, because ultimately we do need to break even on whatever projects we're doing, because loss making and things won't last for very long. So it needs to break even either through the person who's actually doing the course. Someone needs to eventually pay for it so that the model is sustainable. And that's what I think social enterprise is all about. It's working on sustainable solutions. So I think freemium is a good way to go in this country to create some amount of mindset change. You give them something free, they get hooked on, and then if they can afford it, they pay, or you get subsidized through CSR. So we've had programs done by Yale, Berkeley, Harvard, Stanford, where funding has come in, UNDP, for low-income students. And that's a fine way to make sure that those who need this get it, but at the same time, salaries still get paid and quality is maintained at the end of the day.
Thank you, Shweta, for adding that. And since we have already overshoot our time, we won't be taking any further question. If from our participant, if they have any question, they can reach out to us and we can direct them to our panelists. They will be in touch with us. Just last thing that I want to ask each of panelists if they can share their feeling, how they are feeling after today's discussion, and what is one takeaway that they want to take from today's session, and then I'll hand over to Maya for a thank you note.
It was a great session to so much of from all the experience of working, like Shweta's freemium, that thing, that how we can take the model to the government colleges, or Rajesh model of how we can introduce that internship program and policy in next few years, changing the dimensions. I just like to share that our institute has submitted a guideline how to implement this new education policy, which has been now released by Ministry of Education in 2 parts report. So if anybody of you want, you can take that and read it. So that is going to fundamentally change. If we are successfully going to implement this policy, in next 5 years, we will change the whole new Indian education system, which is going to be world competitive system, I would say. Thank you.
Thank you, Rohit, for that wonderful thought.
Yeah, I think I'll add that, definitely a lot of learning from each other and the participants' questions, and overall a lot of hope for India. Talented people, doing so much, and thank you, you all at Systems to put this together, and would definitely like to see this journey taking forward, and understand how it is helping and shaping on the ground the different education aspects which we are talking about. Yeah. So thank you, everybody.
I mirror that emotion, Rahul. Hope is what I'm leaving with, actually. actually just listening to each of the panelists, sort of viewing this problem in so many different ways, and ensure actually each one of you is bringing intent, right? If we have intent in trying to solve the problem, that is the first step. If we don't have an intent, then no problem is going to be solved. And to just see that intent coming through your passionate words and your work is very inspiring. So much for that.
Yeah, thanks everyone. I really enjoyed being on this common platform, and my takeaway is I have 5 more conversations to have, one with each of you after this panel, to see how we can actually collaborate and take things further. So really thank you to those Tanuja brought us on this platform, for moderating, and look forward to taking this impact beyond a conversation to actual execution.
Absolutely. I think I resound with what Shweta is saying. That's the first thing I'm going to do too. And there's a lot of commonality that can be brought in together, and there's a lot of synergy that comes in, and that's very, very, very obvious. The team that's right now here, and I think that's the future. There are multiple collaborations that will work, and that's the way forward. And for everybody. And as I said, at the end of the day, our focus should be the learner. And the moment you have that focus very clear, this is the end person who's going to gain out of this. Everything else will simultaneously fall into place. And thank you for this opportunity. And I'm sure we all will gain out of the entire.
Thank you, everyone, for sharing their experience. I think the purpose that we try to achieve through this panel discussion is solved from my point of view, because we were trying to co-create a space where we can learn from each other, and we can see this whole massive system, that there is no one solution that is gonna work, but will be a bucket of solution that we need to bring in to solve this education crisis. And I think I can see that is happening because of this dialogue. With that thought, I will hand over to Maya for a closing of this session. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks for doing half my job. I just want to wholeheartedly thank all the panelists for coming together on a platform, not thinking that 5 is a crowd, and still having enough time to weave in the conversation by taking parts from what the other panelists shared and building on it. That's what essentially systems is all about. It was a wonderful session. Thank you, audience, for your patient listening and the questions. And definitely we are looking at deep diving in the near future. For now, we are going to again assimilate insights from what you all have said, and then build on that. We are also looking to having those conversations that Shweta was alluding to, and see how systems innovation as a platform can be used for probably slicing each section of the mammoth system that we are talking about, higher education, and having sessions around one each or something like that. But for today, it is I would just end by saying have a good afternoon, evening, stay safe, and this is just a semicolon, and we hope to meet you again.
Yeah. And Maya, some folks have asked for the slides, and do we want to make that available?
Yeah, sure. We can make the slides available. That's not a problem. And the recording and the slides will be shared. We'll communicate. Yes.
Just a clarification question. Slides from our side or slides from the slides that were shared by Rahul?
From our side.
Okay,
Yes.
thank you.
Great.
Yeah.
Thank you,
Wonderful.
everyone.
Thank you. Have a wonderful.
Thank you, everyone. Bye bye.
Bye bye.
Thank you.